Thank you for joining us for our September Health and Wellness Awareness Series. Whether you're here in person or tuning in virtually, we are so excited to have you as we kick off our final few awareness series presentations for the year. Before we get started with today's presentation, I would like to tell you a little bit about the Women's Fund. We were founded in 1979 and have focused our efforts on empowering Houston area girls and women to be advocates for their health and wellness. We do this through focused seminars like today's presentation, as well as curriculum-based classes and publications. All of our services are free of charge. If you are ever interested in learning more about the Women's Fund or receiving any of our publications, or even learning about how we can maybe bring programming to you and your organization, feel free to reach out to us at thewomensfund.org. In order to limit distractions for today's presentation, we do ask that you keep yourself muted if you are online. And if you do have questions, we do encourage you to put those into the chat. We will have a brief Q&A at the end of the session, and so we can definitely address those questions then. Lastly, at the end of the presentation, we are going to ask that you fill out a brief survey to just provide us with some feedback, let us know how we're doing, and we always welcome any comments or suggestions that you have as well. So our speaker for today is Valerie George. Valerie George is an individual and group psychotherapist in private practice in Houston. Trained at the Baylor College of Medicine's outpatient psychiatry clinic, she enjoys working with clients with analytically informed psychodynamic lens. She has been trained in skills-based behavioral approaches as well. She works with the Petoskey Center, a mental health intensive outpatient program where she facilitates interpersonal process, mentalizing, and skills groups. Valerie is President Emeritus of the Houston Group of Psychotherapy Society. Please join me in welcoming Valerie George.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to come and speak today. I enjoy putting presentations together to kind of mix it up in terms of my daily routine. So it's often fun to get out and talk about what is actually important to me and is one of my passions, and that is growth and learning. So I wanted to talk about coping and developing with stress through the lifespan. The topic that was suggested to me was stress through the lifespan, and I decided to take it as a more positive viewpoint on it, focusing on some of the effects of stress, but also focusing on some of the opportunities of having what we call stress in our lives, and we'll get into breaking that down just a little bit. The American Psychological Association definition of stress. This is more of what we would consider a medical model. And what I'd like for you to do is pay attention to the words that are written in red on the slide. The psychological or physiological response to internal, inside the self, or external stressors. Stress involves changes affecting every system of the body, influencing how people feel and behave. For example, it may be manifested by palpitations, sweating, dry mouth, shortness of breath, fidgeting, accelerated speech, augmentation of negative emotions, and fatigue. So if you'll notice that those first words in red are primarily symptom-based, physiological, they happen in the body. People who have studied stress have identified a general adaptation syndrome, and this usually looks something like having the types of disorders focused on physiological issues that affect the quality of life. there's also other problems that stress induces as well. So the general adaptation syndrome, focus on the words written in yellow again, is the initial phase. So this is the shock phase, and it's can be marked by, again, these physiological symptoms that happen in the body. And they interact with all kinds of tissues and organs and our pulmonary system and our cardiac system. The countershock phase, which engages the sympathetic nervous system. So we have two aspects of our nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what evolutionary scientists believe helped us be here today. We created a part of our nervous system where we could have sensations in the body that alert us to our environment around us and also the people we interact with. For an example, we have a physiological reaction to the feeling that we identify as fear. We see a tiger, we've learned to run, or else we wouldn't be here. Problem is we don't live that way in our modern life usually. So those direct stressors of fear and stimulus of fear are much more indirect in modern day life. And so we can have what we call anxiety versus fear. And the difference between the two is that fear is an appropriate response to an actual stimuli. And anxiety is a perception of fear to a perception of a threat. And we can go over some of this later if we want to come back to it. The resistance stage, or the adaptation stage, consists of stabilization at the increased physiological levels. So then we get into more of the chronic stage of phase. So the shock phase, we can call that the more acute stress. You know, you get in a car accident, and then you have this ongoing stress dealing with that. If you have injuries or if your car is messed up, or if there's somebody really hurt, that's a shock. And then we have the resistance stage, or another way to think about it is more chronic stress, where you're undergoing the types of stimuli in your life that are sort of not as resolvable. They just endure and go on and on and on. The exhaustion stage is characterized by the breakdown of acquired adaptations. So in the middle phase, you're adapting and you're functioning, you're doing okay. Not that it's comfortable. The exhaustion stage is when things become less functional. Pay attention to these words: sleep disturbances, irritability, severe loss of concentration, restlessness, trembling that disturbs motor coordination, fatigue, jumpiness, low startle threshold, vulnerability to anxiety attacks, depressed mood, crying spells. And this is when you get people that probably need intervention. So what I'd like to focus on today, forgot one slide here. Stress is an umbrella term. So I'm going to break it down in this way. And this is what I, in my training, understand, is primarily the emotional and cognitive issues that go along what we consider stress. Obviously, we have a lot of physiological responses to stimuli in our lives that cause us stress, but that's more medical, and that's not something that I'm necessarily going to focus on today. So first of all, this is the emotion wheel. Therapists, I don't know if anyone looking at this has any recognition of what this is, but therapists use this in their work a lot. So what happens when we have a stimulus in our life, and this can be internal as well, we usually have a sensation in our body, which we then move up in our mind to maybe consider labeling with language as one of these core feelings. In affective theory, There's some debate, but what we've kind of landed on is that there are core emotions that most people feel throughout cultures. And they are anger, fear, love, joy, surprise, and sadness. Now, there is a little bit of a debate whether shame is a core emotion. Some people argue that shame and guilt are more in the fear category. So it's interesting how there is kind of, this is theoretical, because when we were born, we didn't come into the world saying, I'm sad, or I'm wet, or I'm hungry. Our body had a reaction, a physiological reaction that came out in screams and tears. And the reason why it's important to put language to the sensations that occur in our body under stress is because it helps us process cognitively what is happening inside us. So if I can say, my best friend is upset with me, and I fear both that she will be not my friend anymore, but I also I feel a sadness because she's upset with me, and maybe a little bit of guilt and remorse. I need to have that in my mind so that I can process it and then go to her and perhaps repair the relationship. So if I can say to myself, I'm having these feelings in my body, and I don't know about you, but when I feel sad, I feel it kind of right here in my throat. But when I feel kind of guilty, I feel it more in my abdomen. When I feel anxiety and fear, it's more in my chest. For different people, it's different. It's important to understand where feelings reside in the body as a physiological response, so that you can then come into your mind and make sense of it, so to speak. Therapists like to say process it, but really it's making sense of it. What's happening here? If anybody would like to have this emotion wheel, they're all over the internet, and I recommend them. I tell my parents and my families, put it on the refrigerator so that we can broaden our words around the way we feel. We are not taught this in school. There's no class on feelings. We learn it in the home, or we don't learn it at all until later on we come into therapy and then we learn it. So then I'll move on to the more cognitive aspects of stress. So usually there's something that happens either on the inside ourselves, like I could have a stimulus on the inside of myself that senses something's wrong, that more instinctive, intuitive sense, like something's not right here. So that would be more internal. Or there can be something that happens on the outside of me where I'm late for an appointment and I'm hitting traffic. And then I have something happen in my body, sensations and emotions and memories. Like, oh, when I was late that one time, I got in so much trouble. So I'm having these reactions in my body. Then we tend to climb up in our heads and have thoughts about what's happening around us, what's maybe happening inside us, and we make interpretations about what's happening. Again, we're always trying to make sense of what's going on. It's primary survival. So stimuli, emotions, thoughts, it can also go the other way around. You can have some thoughts that create some emotions that then create an urge to action or an urge to behavior. So it can go both ways. And it's also in a loop. This is a continuum. It's not discrete. Let's see. So I'm missing a slide. So I was just going to talk about thought distortions a little bit. Thought distortions are Most people are familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy. It's one of the most studied evidence-based therapies out there, because since it is a behaviorist therapy, you can isolate and observe a behavior, measure it, and do outcome studies. So it's very measured, but it's also very specific and precise. So thought distortions, if you can identify them, are something like mind reading. I mean, I often will say, well, can you read their minds? Like, how do you know they're thinking that, right? Because oftentimes the thought distortions that we have lead us to feel worse. So if we can have some check the facts in terms of what's really happening, then we can check and see, am I minimizing this situation? Am I under responding here in terms of maybe the way I need to be more responsive? Or conversely, am I over responding to something that really doesn't need to be responded to? And these all come from our thoughts, which then, as I said before, materialize first in our feelings. So another thought distortion that we can have is magnification, like making things, we have this incredible amount of anxiety or feeling ashamed about something, and all of a sudden the problem becomes bigger than it might actually be. But it's important to understand that that's a natural process, and to not actually shame anybody for magnifying problems, because in their heart and in their bodies, they may be feeling very intensely about it. So it's something to be treated as with care, but also to be pointed out, do you think that it's possible that you might be magnifying this bigger than it actually is? Another one is personalization. Whatever has happened out there, this is my fault. I get rear-ended. All of a sudden, if I tend to personalize things, it'll be my fault. I stop too quickly. When we know that you don't have any control if somebody rear-ends you, it's just something that happens because maybe a driver was distracted. But if you personalize often inside yourself, you make things your fault, and then you have problems with chronic shame. There's other ones: overgeneralization, magical thinking, which is a favorite. Magical thinking is when you project that perhaps you decide that taking 100 supplements a day, I'm not saying that that's not going to help, but you project taking 100 supplements a day is going to cure a chronic disease. And so you begin to sort of think magically about these supplements, when in reality, will they hurt you? Will they not work at all? Are you just wasting your money? Or is it placebo? Is it helping you just because you think it might be helping you? We don't know. But that could be a form of magical thinking. So most of you who have taken any high school psychology class or Psychology 101 will remember this. I use it because it's just so easy. It breaks things down in such an easy format. Most of you have heard of this, right? Maslow's hierarchy. So when we're talking about stress, the foundation, the reason why it's in pyramid form, is that our physiological needs are primary. If we are living in a system or we've grown up in poverty, or we're living in chronic racism, or we don't have education, or we're handicapped in some way, disabled in some way, and we don't have the ability to create what we need to take care of our physiological needs, or we don't have people connected to us to help us take care of our physiological needs, that's probably the greatest stress there is. Think about our homeless. Our homeless have all kinds of chronic health problems. And also we know Black and brown populations in this country are faced with many more health problems because sometimes both their physiological needs are not taken care of in the system, in our institutions that we've created, but also safety needs, because they're having to live in spaces that are not safe. I'll move up. Safety is also the next basic need that we need to meet in order for us to not experience chronic stress. People can feel safe in many ways, but they can feel unsafe in many ways too. This can also include emotional safety. If you're living in a home that looks good on the outside and seems to be well equipped, has healthy caretakers who are gainfully employed, but you're living with chronic, stressful parental conflict, then children growing up in that home are not going to feel safe. And that is going to affect their level of stress. Their level of stress is going to be chronic. And depending on if they can get any kind of intervention, such as having a strong interpersonal relationship outside the home, strong relationships with other family members, or interventions with a mental health field, they might be somebody who would develop chronic trauma, which is a severe form of stress. The next basic need we need to have met is some sense of love and belonging. It is essential. After the pandemic, I started to work, and during the pandemic, I worked with a lot of young people who experienced a really intense sense of loneliness because children need to interact socially in order to grow and feel a sense of belonging. That was removed from them. And it's really had some significant effects on our young people, especially, I would say all of our young people, but middle and high school and college age kids especially, because those are the times when kids are going through their life stages and learning how to be with one another. So if you don't have some sort of connectedness or relationship or a sense of belonging in some sort of group or community, that is a basic need that's going unmet. Another basic need is a sense of self-esteem, and that's a very broad subject. But essentially, self-esteem is the sense that I'm okay. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be fabulous. But if you move around in the world and you have a sense of, I'm okay, then that basic need of self-esteem is being met. This is something that I run into a lot with our young people. That sense of, well, I'm not making straight A's. I'm not okay. Or I can't seem to connect with people at school. People don't like me. I'm not okay. That's a basic need that's not getting met. And then the top one is, in my opinion, sort of an idealized human need. And the way it was originally written about was this, it was more ethereal. It was more like this idealized sense that I've self-actualized. It also goes along with that idea that you can go through a course of therapy and be analyzed, right? I don't think that's possible. But what I do think is possible and what we all need is a sense of self-knowledge. And that is knowing ourselves well enough and having enough esteem and having enough experiences of love and belonging, having enough safety and having our physiological needs met enough so that I can have a sense of how I affect people in the world and have in both positive and negative ways, right? Since we're not all perfect, when we are self-actualized, we have a sense about who we really are. And that includes our flaws and our gifts. So it's really, seems simple actually, but it's complicated in terms of if one of those basic things aren't being met, then somebody's going to be feeling a sense of maybe even chronic stress and trauma. Now, you guys familiar with this one too, right? This is kind of fundamental. Do you know about Erikson's developmental stages? So this is when I'm going to get into talking about stress over the lifespan. So Erik Erikson was a psychoanalyst, and he decided to take Freud's theories and reduce them down to things that we can actually understand. And so I think this is really nice. So as an infant, the central question that we have to answer, even before we have language, believe it or not, we call that pre-verbal understanding, is a sense of trust versus mistrust. The central question that needs to be answered in this stage is, can I trust the world? If there's not consistent caretaking, if my needs are going unmet, if I'm hungry, if I'm feeling a sense of separateness from those people around me that I want to be close to, I need to have that closeness with a central caretaker or caretakers, then my basic needs aren't being met, and I might decide, no, I can't trust the world. The reason why this is important is because I need to be able to trust the world in order to operate in a way that I can defend against stress in my life. There are many ways in which an infant can go with their needs unmet. And so we say, or there's a ratio kind of like every 4 needs need to be met to every 2 needs that get unmet. So it's not perfect, but needs need to be met enough where the infant grows into toddlerhood, which begs the central question to be, not only can I trust the world, but is it okay to be me? Those of you who've been around toddlers or have raised them or have grandchildren, you know that at this stage, they are toilet training, they are wanting to make age-appropriate choices like, no, I don't want a banana, I want an orange, right? So if you can give them those age-appropriate choices and let them have a win, that tells them, it sends the emotional and psychological message, it's okay to be you. It's okay to want an orange. And so the basic needs here are age-appropriate choices. Like, I can run around this house and I can play with whatever toy I want with limits. So appropriate choices with limits, because if you don't have limits, then there's a sense of chaos that gets internally developed. And so the central question in this stage may not be answered. It's not okay to be me. So shame and doubt develop as a central way in which some of these folks start to show up into the world. Instead of the sense of assertiveness and autonomy, and I don't mean independence, I mean autonomy, which is different, then shame and doubt as a core part of your being starts to develop, and if not interrupted, that's problematic. Then we move into early childhood, which is around 3 to 6 years. And the central question here that needs to be answered, is it okay for me to be out in the world, asserting myself in the world, exploring, testing safety and boundaries, challenging the limits that are being set around me, and also starting to learn consequences. Now, of course, the consequences can't be missing and they can't be too severe. In order for this stage to go well and for this question to get answered, is it okay for me to be out in the world? Then we start to develop this quality that he termed initiative. Usually kids at this age, early childhood leading into late childhood, which we also call latency, these are very industrious years. This is where kids are usually their most well adjusted, unless there's significant stress going on. Then these questions aren't getting answered, and you see children start to withdraw, maybe not make friends, and maybe they start not doing as well in school. And so all kinds of stressors can come in around this child during these developmental stages and interrupt these central questions that the psychological mind needs to be answering. Late childhood, latency, 7 to 10, the central question is, can I make it in the world of people? Do I have what it takes to be creative in the world? And what I mean by that is not destructive, but to be creative in the world, to make a contribution. Can I do stuff? And it's really important because this is where children really start to budding abstract thought, and they start to really learn about the world and themselves. And if you can remember, latency age, you're not as self-conscious until boom, what hits next? Puberty, right? Adolescence hits. And then we know this physiologically that our nervous system just goes wild. We just start feeling things that we've never felt before. And our sense of observation of ourselves becomes heightened. And our sense of wanting to conform. So this stage is the central question that needs to be answered here is, who am I? Or who can I be? Is there possibility for me? And since everybody is unique and different, the who am I question is very important because we need to be able to know ourselves enough inside and have enough initiative to find out who am I and be able to live that out in the world. So we do that primarily through social relationships. So this is the period of life, as you can remember, that you are very interested in conforming and making relationships. And so if you can answer the question, who am I and who can I be? Then you can go out into the world and be more creative. When adolescents experience too much stress, and a lot of it has to do with stress interrupting some of those former developmental stages, then children in this age period tend to have problems and they begin to act out and rebel. Early adulthood, the central question is, can I unite myself with another person? And Erickson, bless his heart, was a white guy a long time ago. And he said, we need to be getting married. Now we know that you can have intimate relationships in your life and do it very differently than a traditional marriage. But the question is can I develop intimacy in my life? This is what was really focused on in early adulthood. We form our closest relationships usually, those outside of our close childhood relationships. Develop our sexual selves more. It starts in adolescence, but really becomes more built out through intimate relationships in early adulthood. And can I have and maintain intimate relationships with friends and family? Now we know, I'm a big group psychotherapy person, so we know that that is a modality that treats mental health issues at a greater rate often than just individual psychotherapy. There's lots of studies that says if you can join a group of peers and have a safe container in order to bring out your most intimate questions and feelings and thoughts and desires and share them with other people in a safe space, people get better because then they realize, oh, it's not so scary to be who I am in the world and reveal myself. Midlife, the central question is, can I make my life count? William James, is we consider him America's first psychologist, I guess, philosopher. And he said the central craving of any human being is the desire to be appreciated, to be seen, to be known, to be heard. And in midlife, we want to be able to take a look back a little bit and say to ourselves, did I accomplish what I really wanted to? Is my life where I want it to be? Now, midlife often is a very stressful time of life. Not only are you probably finishing up raising children if you have them, but also you're looking at the next generation and you're seeing what problems might be happening there. And oftentimes you're stressed because you're caring for two generations at the same time. We've heard about this a lot. You know, it's called the sandwich developmental stage, where you've got a lot of things going on. Now, if things are going well, the economy's good, your job's okay, your relationship's okay. A lot of people go through long-term relationship breakup at this time. Then you can deal with the stresses a little better if you have some of those things in place. Late adulthood, we've learned as we start to live longer and longer, the central question in late adulthood, when people are moving through that maturational stage, and it is still a maturational stage, they begin to go inward more and become more reflective and gain wisdom. And the central question to ask here is it okay to have been me? Did I live my life in accordance to my values? Have I made peace with my mistakes? Have I repaired the relationships that I want to repair? These are all very important questions as we age. And of course, the stressors there are innumerable, mainly because somebody said that aging is a series of small diminishments. It's a series of small losses. And that's stressful. The body breaks down. You start to lose people you love. You start to lose maybe a sense of your own mind. And so there's a lot of stress that happens in this stage. But if you can encourage yourself or with a group of people or in your religious institutions to go inward and reflect and make peace, those people age well. Any questions there? I know that I'm just kind of talking. I usually interact with people, but there's a survey link. So there's a couple of slides missing, and I think it's probably my fault. One of the ways that we can think about distress is that we can break it down to two words that are kind of hyphened, like a prefix distressed. And what we need to do is to find coping skills for being distressed. Distress tolerance is a group of skills that I teach in my practice, and it is a group of skills that actually engage the other side of the nervous system that I talked about earlier, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the side of the nervous system that gets engaged when you take a hot bath or after you run, intense exercise. And you know the feeling when you come in and you're really, really hot outside, and you come in and you stand under the fan and your whole body relaxes? After a massage, after sex, the parasympathetic nervous system becomes engaged and your physiology actually comes down. So we say, use the tip skills. Take a hot bath or take a hot shower and then turn it on cold. Run up and down the stairs or do jumping jacks. Do what we call progressive relaxation, which is where you tense your muscles all up and down your body for 10 seconds. Tense, release, all of the muscle groups all up and down your body over and over again until you feel that sense of relaxation. Then you can move into the other types of skills that we teach once your physiology has come down and you're under stress. And usually that's because you're experiencing high emotions. I think our culture is much more comfortable talking about stress than we are emotions. And I think that when we are experiencing stress, yes, we might be having unresolvable problems that are happening around us. But if we can't have a dialogue with ourselves in terms of our own emotions and how to cope with those physiological events, then the stress compounds and becomes more chronic. So I just wanted to go over the types of coping skills. One is, I just mentioned the distress tolerance skills, which are physiological, and they engage the parasympathetic nervous system to help our physiology calm down. It decreases defensive and maladaptive reactions. So if I'm high emotion, high physiology, I'm going to have thoughts that are distorted, and then maybe urges and actions, and behave in ways that are going to have negative consequences and aren't adaptive for my life. Some of those reactions can be avoidance. It's a popular one, where you just stick your head in the sand and you don't deal with it. That works for a while until it doesn't, until it makes things worse. Or you can get really active and start acting everything out and having, making sure that people around you know that it's their problem and not yours, right? Mindful of current emotions, mindful of the current moment. So you've heard this word, I'm sure, tossed around in the vernacular in the culture recently. It's become very popular. And the way we think about mindfulness and coping is that we just want to become more aware in the moment. That's all it means. It's not meditation. It's not getting rid of your thinking. We can call that self-observation. We can call that self-examination, but we can also check in with other people around us. Hey, this thing just happened. Help me think about it, or help me listen to my feelings and tell me if you experienced it the same way, or give me feedback on this, right? Help me be more mindful of what's happening in the present moment. The other coping skills that we teach is emotion regulation, or receiving care. See, some people don't know how to receive care that well. And so we have to notice that and say, if you would let yourself receive care a little bit more, you might feel better. Some people are trying to care for you right now. But also emotion regulation and knowing how to care for yourself. Now, I'm going to distinguish care for yourself with self-care. Self-care is also another term that's being thrown around a lot. My personal belief and my personal bias is that self-care is a myth. I think that it is something that has been thrown around a lot in terms of more of a industrialized commodification of light a candle or get a massage or buy a set of Pilates classes or go to yoga, right? All that stuff costs money. What care of the self is slightly different. It's taking the time to prepare yourself a healthy meal, at least one time a day. Making sure that you have a bedtime routine. These are simple things that many people in our modern life are not doing. They're not doing it a lot. And we know that those simple routine things in our lives help reduce stress. So we call that emotion regulation. There's also other things that we teach, like when you're feeling distressed, distract yourself, but stay out of avoidance. Avoidance is unconscious. Distraction has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I'm going to watch this Netflix show from this time into this time, and I'm not going to worry about that thing that happened today, or that thing that's chronically going on in my life that I can't resolve. I'm just going to take a vacation for a minute. Distraction is a healthy coping skill. Avoidance is not. The other coping skills we teach is what we call interpersonal regulation, or interpersonal skills. A lot of us learn these naturally growing up in our families and our communities, but a lot of us don't. We don't learn the skills, how to be honest and direct, how to ask for what we need, how to say no, how to maintain a relationship, how to say I'm sorry and repair. These things we often need to learn, and sometimes we need to learn them as adults, and that's okay. So we teach people, this is how you go and make a repair with somebody. These are the steps you need to take to ask for what you need or what you want. This is how to tolerate, and this is very important, to tolerate the anxiety setting a boundary. Everybody says, set boundaries, say no, set boundaries. It's very hard to do because when you are setting a boundary, you're breaking a pattern usually. And usually it's going to bring up some sort of anxiety in you of, oh no, I am saying either no, or I'm limiting something or someone in a way, and they aren't going to like it. It's very difficult to do, but very important part of interpersonal skills. So what did I say? Maintaining relationships, asking for what we need, maintaining self-respect, setting boundaries, saying no. These are all interpersonal skills that we can teach people. And I do it all the time in my practice. So I think I might have covered it. I'm sure there's more, but that's all I have today.
Thank you. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and open up the floor for questions at this time. If you are online and you would like to submit a question, you can add it into the chat, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. I know that might be easier for some of us. While we wait on that, if there's anyone in the room that has questions. Okay, I always have questions. I'm going to say. So I
did too good of a job.
Yeah. So I really liked towards the beginning of the presentation when you were talking about these different stages, and when you got down to the exhaustion stage, I just kind of wondered, is it kind of inevitable that if someone is in the resistance stage that they're going to then progress into the exhaustion stage, or can you be in that resistance stage for a prolonged period of time and maybe you never enter that third stage?
I think, yes, I think with good relationships and support and coping skills, you can endure a stressful situation for quite a while. But when you don't have people around you, or developmentally, maybe you didn't answer some of those questions that you needed to answer for yourself, emotionally and psychologically. Or if you don't have the skills to go to just file down the edges of that stress, then yes, I think you can stay in that stage, but that's more of an acute stage, right? Like some people deal with chronic stress much better than others. But again, it's focused on, I'm always focusing on interpersonal relationships and what are you doing to cope? And trust me, many of us have maladapting coping mechanisms. The idea is not to be perfect with this, but to keep learning more what works for you.
What if someone's in the exhausted stage?
They need intervention.
And what type of intervention would that be? Therapy?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? And it depends on what's happening. But for an example, it's funny, we're in the breast cancer center. But in 2019, I went through breast cancer myself. And I attended a support group. And I was exhausted because I was going through chemo. But it was through those relationships that I felt a sense of, oh my gosh, they get it in a way that nobody else around me does. And I lived for those meetings. And so I think that you can deal with something that was not lifelong, but it was long enough that it was a chronic stressor for me. You know, I continued to try to work, but it was really through feeling known and seen in a sense of belonging with other people that were going through the same thing, I think that kept me afloat. And I was actually able to work 3 days a week. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So another question that I had was, you mentioned for toddlers the importance of choices with limits. Can you give some examples for that? And then you also mentioned like whenever I guess they get a little bit older and they're recognizing or trying to understand like consequences, that they need to have consequences, but not too severe.
Right.
Can you give some examples of like those two situations?
Yes. And before I answer this, I'll say that parenting is the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, by and large, the hardest thing I've ever done. There is no quick and easy here. But I do think that having an eye on what developmental stage is my child in right now, or even if you're a family member and you're in the home and you're seeing stressed out parents and you're seeing a toddler who just wants another snack versus this snack, you know, in your mind, they just want to have a sense of autonomy. And so give them appropriate choices. One thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to go to the closet and open it up and say, which outfit do you want to wear? Right? So laughing because you know it. Right? And it's changed that much. And so usually what happens inside the toddler or the preschool age child is that's too many choices. And so they go into a sense of chaos and they may collapse on the floor and they're on the floor crying and you don't know why. But if you say, do you want to wear the red one or the green one? They say, I'll wear the green one today. So appropriate choices, right? You know already in your mind what the limits are. So you give them choices that are inside the limits where they feel like, oh, I got to have a say, and that's a little victory, which enhances their sense of autonomy. Did I answer?
Yes, yes, did. And then for the consequences.
Oh, well, I mean, I think that consequences, and this is very hard for parents, especially, I'm going to say, I'm not picking on high achieving people, but it's very hard for parents to let children have natural consequences. Natural consequences, because if you protect them too much from consequences in the world, they will try to go out into the world and they'll bump up against the world and they'll get hurt because they don't understand natural consequences. But if you can drive your kid to school, I'm talking as a parent here, but drive your kid to school, drop them off, and the school calls and says, you know, they left their homework, or, you know, now they have cell phones, so they text you, and I left my homework. Sorry? And that's really hard to do. And when I suggest this to my parents, they think I've lost it. But I say, you know, this is what happens when you don't remember your homework. It's a natural consequence, right? You don't want to say, here, climb up this ladder to the roof and better hang on, or, I mean, you know, or you'll fall. I mean, that's not safe, right? They'll hurt themselves. But those natural consequences that aren't really hurting anything, but will send a message to the child, those are the best. Otherwise, you're just setting limits. Yeah, no, you can't stay up that late, or yes, you have to get up now, or like that. Not that it's that simple, trust me.
Yeah, those are good examples. Any other questions? Okay. So if you could go back to that wheel that you put up, I really liked that. I honestly might.
It's right on the internet. Oh, I'm
print it out for myself. Yeah. So I was wondering if you had any other suggestions for anything like this. I know for some people it's really hard because you talked about the importance of identifying that feeling and then being able to communicate it to the other person in hopes of coming to some kind of like resolution or, you know, so for people who have a hard time, I know I am 29 years old and sometimes I can't put a label on what I'm feeling.
Me either.
I know this is really great. I'm definitely going to use this. Do you have any other suggestions for how to get that going?
Really, the purpose of this is to give you words. And when you're stuck, look at the words on the page and see what resonates. And then I suggest going toward the middle. So if you're feeling tenderness, oh, I'm feeling a sense of love. Or if I'm feeling a little lonely, well, that's in the sadness category, right? That indicates a loss. So our feelings have purposes, like, you know, some women, especially, I'll say women, you know, we have trouble with anger because we're taught when you can't do that. Don't be like that. But we need our anger because we need to understand when we are angry and we are truly angry, not just covering up another emotion. When we're truly angry, there's usually a wrong that needs to be righted. Right? This makes me mad. This isn't right. So we have reasons for our anger. So you can kind of go and say, why am I feeling so frustrated? Why am I feeling so angry? Like irritability, exasperation, envy. Envy's an anger emotion. Disgust is an anger emotion. Frustrated, hostile, hate. I mean, all these are human emotions. It's part of being human. It's part of the human experience. But if you can have those feelings, and we say identify, observe, find the word, experience, let it move through you. We know through science around affect theory that discrete emotions only last 90 seconds. So you may have a bunch of 90 seconds in a row, but there is a beginning, a middle, and an end to a discrete emotion. I had a great mindfulness teacher that really taught me this, and she started telling jokes, and we all started laughing, and then we just started getting each other more and more silly. And she said, take that humor, what you're finding really funny right now, and I want you to keep laughing as long as you can. Well, it feels so good to laugh like that, right? But you can't keep it forever. It dissipates. And when you're feeling an intense sense of disappointment and that depletion that comes along with that sadness, it's good to know that these emotions come and go. We liken it to a wave where it washes over you. Now, you may get sad again in the next 90 seconds, but you can at least soothe yourself that it will dissipate.
Thank you. I love that advice of looking outside and working your way in, because I probably would have not done that. So I do like that. Yeah. And then the last question that I like to ask at the end of every presentation we do in this series is, if you could have us walk away and we take like one thing with us, what would be the most important thing that you would want us to take away from today?
Great question. I would say, know yourself, good or bad, and work on your relationships. Because that's really what is sort of like the essence of being human in the world. And know your values and try to adhere to them. I think those, if you're working on those three things, you're spending time doing that and you're exhausted. So you're doing good, I think, if you're focusing on those things.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome.
Wonderful. Great. Nice. How many employees do you guys have? Pretty small group. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here for our presentation. I again have a survey link. I will be sending that out in a follow-up email if you registered with us. We would really appreciate if you would take a few minutes to fill that out for us. If you are like me and you have questions a few days after a presentation, you can always reach out to us at healtheducator@thewomensfund.org, and we will do our best to answer your questions. And lastly, if you are ever curious about what we are up to, we have a lot of wonderful events and presentations coming up. We do have a membership luncheon this Friday at Tony's. So I encourage you to visit our website, thewomensfund.org. There you can see all of the things that are happening with our wonderful organization. Also, please follow us on our social media accounts. If you visit our YouTube channel, you can see previous recorded presentations that we've done in this series, and also some of our other programs as well. And then my last little plug here is for our Doc Talk coming up on September 28th over living to the fullest, maximizing sleep and its benefits. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.